A pregnant widow was fixing a fence with bare hands until the lonely rancher offered her his land and name. Texas Hill Country, June 1871. The sun carved the sky in gold and iron, pressing down on the earth like it meant to melt it into dust. Cicadas screamed in the mesquite trees, the ground shimmered in heat, and the only movement across the wide stretch of broken prairie was a woman swinging a mallet at a fence post, with hands that should not have been lifting more than a kettle. Abigail Monroe, 6 months pregnant and already looking like 7, wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her wrist, smearing dust across her temple. Her fingers, wrapped in scraps of cloth, bled through the linen. The old pine rail wouldn't hold steady. The post had rotted, and the barbed wire coiled at her feet looked like it belonged to the devil himself. She crouched, teeth clenched, and reached for the wire bare-handed. Her fingers found the curve of metal and yanked. A barb sliced the meat of her palm. She hissed, but didn't stop. Hoofbeats came from the east, steady, deliberate. A rider crested the road and slowed at the edge of her property, tipping his hat low against the sun. "Well, I'll be damned," the man said, his voice like gravel rolled in whiskey. "Your husband must be turning in his grave seeing you out here like that." Abigail stood, shoulders square, blood trailing down her wrist. She met his smirk with a stare that had held firmer men than him. "My husband is in the grave," she said coldly, "and I am the only one left to finish what he started." The man clicked his tongue and spat. "Wouldn't be if he hadn't run from the war, would he?" Her grip tightened on the hammer. "Keep riding." He did, but not fast. Not before muttering, "Ain't a world made for women alone, darlin'," as his horse kicked up dust behind him. Abigail turned back to the fence. Her chest burned, whether from the heat or rage she couldn't say. She bent down, breath catching, and pulled the wire again. Her vision blurred. Sweat dripped into her eyes. She swayed. Then everything tilted. She dropped the mallet and fell to her knees, one hand gripping her belly, the other pressing against the wound. The ground wavered beneath her. A shadow moved. Not the rider, not someone she had seen before. From the top of the hill, a man descended, boots soundless in the dust, hat pulled low, his frame tall and lean, wrapped in a coat stained by labor, not style. He carried nothing at first, then set down a wooden crate beside her, a battered toolbox. A second thump, a tin canteen of water. She blinked, half dazed. The man crouched. His face was quiet, worn like saddle leather. His eyes, gray new and steady, met hers without a flicker of judgment. "Drink," he said simply. She hesitated. "Who are you?" He didn't answer. She took the canteen, drank deep, wiped her mouth with the back of her arm, and narrowed her eyes. "You think I need rescuing? You're wrong." The man didn't smile, didn't flinch, just gestured toward the broken fence, the bloodied post, the warped wire. "You need land," he said. "You need a name on paper that can't be taken, and you need someone who knows how to hold the line." Abigail stared at him. "What are you offering?" His gaze didn't waver. "I've got all three." She rose slowly, cautious, tired, furious. "You don't know me." "I've watched you," he said. "Long enough to know you don't bend." "You've been watching me?" she snapped. "From the ridge. Every day you're out here alone, doing what 3 men wouldn't." She crossed her arms, shaking with the weight of too much, heat, hunger, grief, and now this stranger with his calm voice and impossible offer. "You want to buy me?" "No," he said. "I want to back you." Silence stretched. A breeze lifted dust between them. She looked down at her bloodied palm, then at the wire, then back at him. "And what's your name?" "Thomas Delaney." She'd heard it before. A recluse, lost his wife and boy in a land war 5 years back. Never remarried, never spoke much, owned more acres than anyone west of San Gabriel. She exhaled slowly. "You came all this way to give me your name?" "No," he said. "I came to see if you'd take it." She didn't answer. But she didn't send him away. Tom Delaney showed up the next morning without a word and started working as if he had always belonged there. He did not ask where the tools were. He did not ask what needed fixing. He found the broken boards in the cattle pen and replaced them. He reinforced the leaning posts by the west gate. When the sun climbed high, he paused only long enough to sip water, then returned to digging holes for new fence stakes while Abigail watched him from the porch, arms folded beneath her belly, heart tight with questions. He did not eat her food unless she placed it near him and walked away. He never entered the house, never asked about the baby, never mentioned her husband's name. But he kept showing up, and the land, once dying beneath her, seemed to breathe again. In the evenings, Abigail would stand near the barn, pretending to organize tools while watching him climb the ladder to the roof, hammer in hand, replacing shingles by the light of a single lantern. The rhythm of it was strangely soothing. He did not speak, but his work spoke for him, clean, quiet, steady. By the end of the first week, the cattle pen stood strong, the roof no longer leaked, and the fences looked like they belonged to people who gave a damn. Still, she did not trust it. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and cast everything in a copper glow, she walked up to him while he was oiling the hinges on the stable door. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Tom paused, eyes on the rusted hinge. He finished wiping the rag along the metal before speaking. "I cannot stand to see good land go to waste." "That's it," she challenged. "That's it," he said. She stared at him. "Not because you want something? Not because you pity me?" He looked at her then, really looked, and shook his head. "You don't need pity. You need things fixed." She almost laughed. Almost. But instead she turned and walked away, confused and slightly unmoored by how simple he made it sound. The next day, two neighbors rode up, while Tom was mending the front gate. One of them, Curtis Lang, was a man who had once tried to buy her land when her husband died. The other was his cousin, all swagger and smirking teeth. They dismounted slow, eyeing Tom like he was an intruder. "Well," Curtis said, spitting into the dirt, "word is you're moving in with the Monroe widow." Tom didn't look up, just drove another nail. "Funny," the cousin added, "how a man goes quiet his whole life, then decides to speak with his boots under a woman's table." Tom stood, wiped his hands, and met both men's eyes without a flicker of hesitation. "I didn't move in." "Didn't you?" Curtis asked. "Then what you doing here?" Tom stepped forward, calm as ever. "She lost her husband. She's carrying a child. She's working ground that half this valley abandoned." "And?" Curtis said. Tom's voice never rose. "I'm not here to buy her. I'm here to help her keep what's worth keeping. If that bothers you, I'll be here tomorrow too." Curtis shifted his weight, uncertain. Tom didn't blink. "Let's go," the cousin muttered. They left. Abigail had seen the whole thing from the porch, one hand resting on her belly, heart beating too fast. That night she brought him supper in a tin plate, warm and fresh. He nodded, took it gently, and ate beneath the tree, with his back to the wind. And for the first time in weeks, she slept without waking. Tom Delaney did not speak much, but scars had a way of telling their own stories. No one in the valley really knew what happened the day his world burned down. They whispered pieces of it. How his wife, Lily, had signed a deed she did not understand. How the ink on that paper gave a rival rancher claim to their southern pasture. How Tom had ridden out to confront the man, only to come home to smoke rising from his land. The house had been torched. His wife and their son were inside. The sheriff said it was an accident, said maybe a lantern tipped over, said maybe Lily had been confused or careless, or that Tom had been too long gone in the hills, chasing shadows. But Tom knew the truth, and that truth hollowed him. After the fire, he did not bury his family in the churchyard. He built a small stone wall on the edge of the ridge and laid them to rest beneath the cottonwood tree she loved. He carved no names, placed no flowers. Only the broken iron hinge from their front door, a reminder that it had once swung open. Then he rode into silence. He sold off half his land, not for money, but for quiet. Kept the high ridge where no one trespassed. Built a cabin with no porch. Spoke to no one. Answered nothing. Until her. He had seen Abigail Monroe before. Not closely, not up close where her eyes met yours and didn't flinch, but from the distance of a man watching someone try to hold back a tide with bare hands. At first he told himself it was nothing, just another widow clinging to bad land, just another war-orphaned heart pretending it could outwork grief. But the day he saw her, belly full with child, hands bleeding, trying to twist barbed wire back into a post half broken, something in him tore. Because Lily had done the same. She had fought for a line in the dirt with the weight of a name that had no power. She had paid for that line in blood. Tom had sworn never to stand on that kind of ground again. And yet, he came down off the ridge. He brought tools. He watched Abigail drive stakes into soil that spit them out. He watched her lift what should have been done by two men, and never once ask for help. And he knew. He did not come to save her. He came because the world had failed too many women like her, and this time, if there was still breath in his chest, he would not stand and watch another house fall. He did not tell her this. There was no point. But every nail he hammered, every board he cut, every fence he mended, carried the weight of the fire he could not undo, and the hope that maybe just once something could be held in place before it burned. Abigail never asked what had made him the way he was, and Tom never offered it. But sometimes, at dusk, when the shadows leaned long over the pasture and the wind stirred the dry grass like ghosts brushing past, he would sit beneath the oak behind her barn, hand resting on the hilt of his old knife, and look west, toward a grave no one visited, and a mistake no one forgave. And in that quiet, something in him healed. Not all of it, but enough to stay. The first time Abigail set a second plate at the table, she did not say a word. She simply poured stew into the cracked blue bowl, set it across from her own, and sat down. Tom hesitated at the door, hat in hand, dust thick on his boots and collar. She looked up once, then returned to slicing bread. He stepped in slowly, as if the house itself might flinch. But it didn't, and neither did she. They ate in silence, the kind not burdened with awkwardness, but worn into comfort like the corners of a well-loved quilt. The only sounds were the click of spoons, the hum of crickets beyond the shuttered window, and the occasional creak of the wind slipping under the eaves. When they finished, he took her bowl and washed it without being asked. She watched him from the doorway, leaning against the frame, her hand resting low on the curve of her belly. "You always this quiet when someone feeds you?" she asked, a half-smile tugging at her lips. Tom looked over his shoulder. "I speak when there's something worth saying." That's so." He nodded, dried his hands, and stepped back out into the night. Abigail stood there a moment longer, watching the door as it eased shut behind him. Then she sighed and turned down the lamp. Later that night, pain woke her. Not the sharp, tearing kind, just a deep ache that wrapped around her lower back and tightened like a warning. She sat up slowly, heart thudding, one hand bracing herself on the wall, the other resting over the baby. Outside, a soft sound. She rose, pulled on her shawl, and walked to the front door. The boards creaked underfoot as she opened it gently, careful not to startle whatever calm had settled. Tom sat on the edge of the porch, elbows on his knees, knife in hand. In his lap rested a thin length of cedar. He was carving it carefully, shaving curls of wood that tumbled like feathers into the dirt. Abigail stepped closer. "What are you doing?" she whispered. He didn't startle, didn't turn. "Making something." She eased down beside him, groaning as her back fought the motion. He glanced at her belly. "You all right?" She nodded. "Just sore. Comes and goes." He handed her the bit of wood. A name had been carved into it. Not a full name, just letters, rounded, unsure, but deliberate. J. Monroe Delaney. Abigail traced it with her finger. "You picked a name?" "I thought maybe you had," he said. "I hadn't." Tom looked away, toward the pasture, where the cattle slept in the hush of midnight and the stars burned low. "I could write you into the land deed," he said suddenly, "as my wife." She blinked. "You want to marry me?" I want your name on the paper, so no one else can come take this place, not Lang, not the bank, not the law. He held the carved piece of wood tighter. You don't need to marry me to be decent, Tom. His jaw worked once, then stilled. I know, he said, but I need a reason to stay. I've wandered too long with none. She looked at him, really looked, at the lines carved by sun and regret into his face, at the way his hand, still holding the knife, rested calm but ready, at the quiet he wore like armor. Then she whispered, "And if I said no?" "I'd keep helping," he said, "as long as you'd let me." She laughed, breath catching. "That's not much of a proposal. I'm not much of a man for grand things." Silence again. But now it hummed like the hush before something blooming. She leaned against his shoulder. "I'm not marrying you because I'm afraid," she said, "or because I'm weak. I wouldn't want you to." She turned the piece of wood in her hands, then tucked it into the pocket of her nightdress. "Then come morning," she said, "we'll go sign what needs signing." Tom said nothing, but he reached out, took her hand, and held it in both of his, rough, warm, sure. The wind rustled the dry grass, a coyote cried somewhere far off, and for once the land around them didn't feel so empty. The papers were signed without ceremony. No preacher, no white dress, no ring exchanged in the dusty air of the county clerk's office. Just two names inked beside each other on the deed to a worn patch of Texas soil: Abigail Monroe, Thomas Delaney. The clerk barely looked up, only grunted and stamped the page, muttering something about property consolidation and tax filing. But to Abigail, the moment felt louder than it looked. Something had shifted. Not in the way people usually meant marriage to shift things, but deeper, quieter, like a hand braced at your back just before the wind picks up. They rode home without speaking. The sun was high, the wind dry, and she clutched the copy of the deed in her lap like it might blow away if she blinked too long. Tom sat beside her in the wagon, steady as ever, reins loose in his fingers, watching the road, but always aware of her. The rumors began before they reached the ranch. By the next market day, folks were already whispering that she had sold herself to the man on the ridge, that Delaney had finally taken a wife, and it only cost him a broken fence and a few pails of water, that Abigail Monroe had done what Monroe women always did, survive, no matter who they had to climb into bed with. She heard it all. At the mercantile, at the feed store, even at the well, where the neighbor women gathered to fetch water they claimed still tasted cleaner than hers. She said nothing. Tom said less, but the silence between them didn't grow heavy. If anything, it became a kind of shield. The nights passed in quiet routines. Her cooking, his repairing, both of them learning to live with the presence of another heartbeat in the house. The baby kicked more now. She swore he knew his father's footsteps, even if his name didn't match. Then came the rock. It shattered the bottom pane of the front window just after sundown one night. Abigail screamed. The baby jolted in her belly. She rushed to the door, breath short, heart pounding. Outside, laughter. 3 boys, young men really, half drunk and full of stupidity. One of them was Lang's nephew. Another was the butcher's second son. The third she didn't know, but his hand still held a second rock. Tom stepped out from the barn. He walked slow, like time didn't touch him, like wind couldn't sway him. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, his boots silent on the earth. He held a rifle, not raised, not loaded, but cradled loosely in his hands like an extension of his spine. The boys stilled. The one with the rock dropped it. Tom didn't speak, didn't flinch, just stared at them, eyes flat, jaw locked, presence iron-heavy. They shifted. One muttered something about a joke. Another took a step back. Then all 3 turned and ran. Abigail watched it all from the porch, her chest tight, with something that felt more like pride than fear. Later that night, she found him sitting in the same chair by the front door, rifle across his knees, watching the dark roll across the hills. She stepped outside, wrapped in a shawl, and stood beside him. "You didn't even cock the rifle," she said. "Didn't need to," he replied. She reached down, took his free hand in both of hers. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not needing to prove anything. Except that you'll still be here tomorrow." Tom looked up at her, expression unreadable. Then he gave her hand the smallest squeeze. And she knew that would always be enough. The sky changed quickly that evening. One moment the sun still hung stubbornly above the ridge, bathing the land in gold. The next, a wall of cloud swept in from the west, bruised and swollen, rumbling like a warning too late to heed. Wind tore across the plains, bending the mesquites and rattling the barn doors. The cattle stirred uneasily. The chickens fell silent. Inside the house, Abigail gripped the edge of the table, breath sharp and shallow. A tightness seized her lower back, then wrapped around her abdomen like a fist. She doubled over with a grunt. It was not the first pain she'd felt that week, but this one did not let go. She'd called for Tom once, but the wind swallowed her voice. Another contraction hit, faster, sharper. She sank to her knees on the kitchen floor, hands trembling. The floor was tough. Bent both of his legs, he nearly fell. "Not yet," she muttered. "It's too soon. Too soon." Lightning split the sky. Thunder followed, shaking the walls. The storm was overhead now. Tom burst through the door seconds later, soaked from the rain, coat flung aside. His eyes swept the room and landed on her. No questions, just movement. He knelt, checked her pulse, cradled her shoulders. "It's early," she gasped. He nodded once, already laying blankets over the floor, rolling up his sleeves. "There's no doctor," she whispered. Tom met her gaze, calm and direct. "Then we do this here." He guided her to lean back against a folded pillow, propped her up with extra quilts, lit 2 lanterns for warmth and light. The fire had already gone out, but the house glowed with the heat of urgency. Rain battered the windows. Wind moaned like a living thing. Her cries came in waves now, raw, broken. "I can't," she sobbed. "I can't do this alone." "You're not alone," he said, voice hoarse. And for the first time in years, he spoke more than a sentence. "You breathe with me, like this. In, out, slow. You hold on to me and don't let go." He moved behind her, settled onto the floor, his back against the wall. He wrapped his arms around her shoulders, bracing her, his chest against her spine. "Lean into me," he said, softer now. "I've got you." She gripped his forearm, nails digging into flesh. He did not flinch. Time became blur. Pain eclipsed all else. She screamed into the wind, into the storm that seemed to echo every tear she'd never cried, every word she'd swallowed since James died. Tom never moved. He held her through every tremor, every convulsion. He whispered to her even when she couldn't hear the words. He mopped her forehead with a cool cloth. When she collapsed between pushes, he cradled her head with a hand as steady as any father's. And then, a gasp, a final cry, a silence so sharp it felt holy, followed by a sound neither of them had heard before. A wail, thin, fierce, full of life. Abigail sobbed. Tom caught the baby, slick, red, writhing, and wrapped it in the cloth she'd placed near the stove days ago, just in case. He checked its breathing, checked its limbs, then gently laid the newborn in her arms. "It's a boy," he whispered. She held the child to her chest, shaking with relief, love, exhaustion. Tears streamed down her face. Tom leaned forward, his forehead resting briefly against the crown of her head. And in the glow of lantern light, with thunder still murmuring in the distance, he said the only thing he needed to say. "You don't have to take my name," he said, voice low and rough, "but this child, he'll never grow up not knowing who his father is." She looked up at him then, eyes swollen, face pale but gaze clear, and in her silence was the answer. Tom reached out, cradled them both, his arms around mother and child. Outside, the storm moved east. Inside, something steadier took its place. A boy's first breath, a man's return to the world, and the quiet forming of a family. No vows, no preacher, no paper. only the truth of who stayed when it mattered. The morning sun poured gently across the wooden floorboards, slipping through the cracks in the shutters and warming the corners of Abigail's parlor. Ash slept in his cradle by the window, his tiny breaths soft and steady. Abigail moved quietly, sorting through the chest that had once held James's letters, receipts, and old maps, things she had not touched since the funeral. She had not meant to open it, but something had tugged at her all morning, a restlessness in her bones she could not shake. Inside, folded at the bottom beneath a packet of war rations and a photograph cracked by time, she found it. A deed. Stamped, notarized, and dated only a month before James died. Her husband had tried to sell the land to Curtis Lang, the very man who'd come sniffing around after the funeral, offering help and making quiet threats. Abigail sat back, stunned, heart pounding in her ears. Her hands trembled as she turned over the paper, reading the language. Transfer of property to Curtis Lang, full rights and access in exchange for the sum of... But in the corner, scribbled in a different hand, more rigid, more exact, were 3 words. Nullified, purchased out. Below that, a second deed, filed after James's death, registered to Thomas Delaney, but the signature on the second line was not his. It was hers, though she had never signed it. She swallowed hard, breath catching as the truth settled. Tom had bought the land, had taken the claim from Lang, had done it before the first hammer struck post, before he ever stepped onto her porch with that battered toolbox. And he had done it quietly, without telling her, without asking for thanks. He had saved what James was willing to sell. She stared at the papers for a long time, the silence of the house pressing in like a question waiting for breath. Later that day, while Ash napped in her arms, she found Tom behind the barn, fixing a saddle strap with hands as sure as ever. She stood there a long moment, the papers rolled tight in her hand. "I found it," she said. He did not look up. "Found what?" "The deed. James's. And yours." His hands stilled. "You bought it out from Lang," she said. "You stopped him from taking it, before I even knew what was coming." Tom set the strap down carefully, then stood. "I did." She stepped closer. "Why didn't you tell me?" He met her gaze then, his eyes steady but shadowed. "Because you had already lost enough," he said. "You didn't need one more man walking in, pretending to be your savior." Her grip tightened on the rolled parchment. "You could have said something." "And what would it have changed?" he asked quietly. "You still would have fought for that land. You still would have bled to keep it. You still would have fixed every fence and carried that boy alone if I hadn't shown up." She looked down, the baby stirring lightly against her chest. "You didn't even sign your name to the second deed," she said. "I didn't need to." Abigail stepped forward, eyes burning now, not with anger, but something more complicated, something older, something softer. "You could have told me you were one of the good ones." Tom's jaw worked. He looked away toward the hills. "I'm not," he said. "I'm just someone who didn't want to watch another woman lose everything she shouldn't have to." Silence stretched between them. Then, with a slow breath, she reached into the fold of her dress and placed the deed in his hand. "I'm not giving it back," she said, "but I thought you should hold it at least once." He took it gently, not like someone accepting thanks, but like someone holding something sacred. She leaned in then, rested her free hand on his chest. "You know," she whispered, "you're allowed to be the reason something good lasts." Tom looked down at her, the sun catching the silver at his temples, the scars along his knuckles. Then he nodded, not in agreement, but in understanding. And somewhere between the weight of the past and the breath of new life sleeping between them, something that had never needed saying finally found a home. 1 year later, the wind still swept the Texas hills, but now it carried more than dust. It carried the scent of hay, warm bread, and something steadier. Home. The boy was walking, wobbling on unsteady legs, arms flailing with a courage only children understand. He toddled along the fence each morning, chasing shadows and whispering to grasshoppers. His laughter rose like soft thunder over the field. Behind him, the house stood stronger. The roof no longer sagged. The porch steps were new. The windows opened to light, not drafts. And above the door, carved in cedar, a sign read, Monroe Delaney Ranch. There had been no wedding, no vows, no lace. But Abigail had moved in, one drawer at a time, until nothing was left in the old place but memory. She kept her name out of respect, but on every deed and document she was Abigail Delaney. And no one questioned it. Curtis Lang hadn't spoken since the day Tom handed the second deed to the clerk and said simply, "It belongs to her now." After that, the stares faded. The rumors died. Even the preacher nodded at them when they passed in town. People brought food again. Each morning, Tom woke before dawn and brewed tea. Strong, no sugar, just a splash of milk, the way she liked it. He brought it to her by the window, where she sat with the baby in her arms. "Thank you," she would whisper. He kissed her hair, then headed to the fields. She never asked where he walked. She knew. He checked the fences, the gates, the old cottonwood where his first family lay, and beside the rusted hinge a new stone stood, blank but placed with care. That spring, a clerk came to update the census. "What's the boy's name?" he asked. "James," Abigail said, holding her son as he gnawed on her sleeve. "Family name?" She nodded. "He's named for the man who gave him life, and the man who gave him a future." Tom stood in the doorway, arms folded. He said nothing, but something in his eyes shifted. Not surprise, just something softer. The baby looked like James, but had Tom's quiet, the way he watched before acting. That summer, they painted the barn together. Abigail climbed the ladder while Tom steadied it. The boy played nearby, stacking pebbles, babbling his own language to the wind. Later, they sat on the porch, legs dusty, shoulders touching. "You ever miss the quiet?" she asked. Tom looked at her, then at the child. "No," he said, "not this kind." The wind stirred the tall grass. The windmill turned. A hawk cried far off. Abigail leaned into him. He rested his hand on hers. They did not need a ceremony to define them. The truth lived in the fences they had mended, the firewood he split, the laughter that filled rooms once hollowed by grief. From afar, the ranch was small, just a house, a barn, a well, a tree. But to them, it was everything. A place claimed not by conquest, but by care. A wound healed not by forgetting, but by staying. And the boy, running wild by the fence, his mother calling gently, his father tipping his hat against the sun, would grow knowing he was not born of luck, but of choice. Because out here the West never asked for heroes. Only for men who stayed when others turned away. And when Thomas Delaney gave his name, he gave back everything he once thought he had lost. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that love can be quiet, steady, and carved into the land more deeply than any words, then you're already part of our world. Here at Wild West Love Stories, we bring you tales of devotion that outlast bullets, storms, and time itself. Stories where hearts speak louder than guns, and staying means more than riding off into the sunset. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that echo through dust and silence. Because out here, love does not need saving, it just needs someone who stays.